Movies, certainly the great two films of World War II that you did, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima, and so many others. I look at this movie and I just don't want to describe it as a war movie. I think it's really more a character study of a warrior, somebody in war. How would you, what would you call this?
Yeah, I would say the same thing about those other two films. The thing that was appealing about Letters from Iwo Jima, for instance, was looking at the war from a different angle after all these years, from the side of the people who were sent to defend the island, and see what it did to their lives and their home lives and everything. And much like this picture, to me, the crux of it is the conflict they have in the civilian life too. When he goes back to try to be with the family, and being torn between the family and his brothers out there on in the combat region, which he wants to get back to because he's obsessed with making sure that they're safe.
Bradley, I mean, I know you were involved with this movie before Clint even got involved. I think Steven Spielberg was at one time attached to it too. You've hung in there with this, and it is truly a tribute to veterans, and we see more about veterans than I think we've ever seen. I know somebody said from the Veterans Administration in 2 decades they've never gotten out the message about what veterans go through than in 2 weeks of American Sniper being open around the country. You know, it's really bringing home that message. Is that what appealed to you? How did you want to get involved with the story of Chris Kyle? And you knew him, you met him, didn't you?
I talked to him once on the phone. It evolved my interest in it. First, I always loved the genre, and Jason Hall had approached me about it, and we talked about it. And I just loved the idea of this guy. I hadn't even read the book yet either. And then the more I got to know Chris, just through talking to Jason, quite frankly, and then the book, and then I watched some stuff on YouTube of interviews when he was on his book tour. I thought, oh, this is such a very charismatic. It's sort of ripe for cinema. This guy, just how he is. But then when he was murdered on February 2nd, 2013, that actually everything changed. The scope of the movie, the focus of the film, it became much more about the relationship between the home life, and to be able to humanize him is very interesting, and because he was a real human being, he is a human being, so it's easy to humanize him if you do the research, and we had access to so much. I mean, Taya Kyle gave us, reams and reams of information, hours and hours of video, and there were email exchanges from 4 tours. So the idea of humanizing this guy, that we would hope that in doing that, people who have a similar experience to Chris, but see him as an iconic figure, but then relating to him, can then make themselves not feel so alone. That was the hope, that if we got it at all right, if we could capture at all a part of who the guy really was, that then maybe people can relate to it and not feel so alone, and their plight, whatever that would be, given those circumstances, would be something that they could feel a part of, as opposed to stigmatized and isolated.
The role of the combat sequences and things are very effective here, but the scenes that really touched me, the ones that I remember most, you sitting in that bar, you're there, you're home,
Yeah.
and you're talking to your wife, wonderfully played by Sienna Miller, and you're there, and she's going, you're here? You're not somewhere else? And to play that scene, it's extraordinary, but it gives you so much insight into what goes on and how they can come back into civilian life, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because we're playing a real guy, and his sort of emotional expression is, if the bandwidth, somebody could be like this, his was like this. And we didn't really, as an actor, and even talking about it, we didn't really know when the crack was going to come, even in the shooting of it. It was going to come when I say the crack, when you sort of see the toll. Is it going to be when he sees when Mark Lee gets killed in an instant? Is it going to be when he takes the belt to the dog? Is it going to be when the psychoanalyst asks him about his time over there? Is it going to be at the phone call? And I didn't really know, but I knew that I could just be true to Chris, and that was the second take. I remember Clint and I were talking about it. It was one push-in, just one, and we sort of talked after the first take and the second take, and I actually remember it quite clearly. This is kind of weird, but I remember, because I cared so much for Chris, and I remember feeling like I was going to cry, and I became very embarrassed, and I remember I went like this with my hat, because I knew the camera was there, and I actually went like this, and I was like squeezing, not to, because I was like kind of hiding Chris from the camera. It was a very weird thing, and that's actually what's in there in the movie, because you can see he does it, and then he looks up, and
That's the second take?
that was the second take, yeah.
Because I know with Clint's films, sometimes you don't get beyond the first take. Clint's very...
A lot of times you never get the first take. You just skip the film altogether.
Oh, you don't even tell him you're doing a take. That's great. And I wanted to ask you about that, Bradley, working with Clint. I mean, obviously, you know, this is what, your 28th movie at Warner Brothers and things like that. And you two working together, it just seems seamless. But what was it like for you, Bradley, working with Clint Eastwood as a director, who's obviously a great actor too?
It was an experience of a lifetime, you know, to say the least. The thing that surprised me more than anything is just how comfortable he made me feel, and everybody made me feel. So I just feel like I'd have to do everything I can to be true to him, and just from a cinematic point of view, from a storytelling point of view, the thing about this guy Chris that I found one of the things that was so sort of interesting about him was how his levity and his emotion, how he was able to convey that, given his formidable physical presence. And without that, it would be a completely different dynamic. So I didn't even know, there was no choice. There was no other way than to get as big as Chris. There just really wasn't, it wasn't an option. And I meant it, that if I didn't get there, there's no way I would have been able to shoot the movie. Just wouldn't have worked if I didn't believe I was Chris. And just being proficient with the three sniper rifles, and you know, I had a lot of help. But yeah, I mean, it was just, you know, when you're playing a real guy, you got to do those things. It's just the way it is. And he was just such a beautiful, interesting, complicated human being. I mean, it was just a privilege to first of all be able to have the time and resources to study this man and have the access to his life in such a personal way. It was like heaven for an actor, and then just, you know, to have his family and from his parents to his wife to his brother entrust us with that role, that responsibility. It was just, you know, I had an endless amounts of energy in order to pursue it. And then the story, working with Clint, there are many funny stories. I just picked one out of a hat last night, basically, but there's a lot of them. It was the rodeo scene at the beginning of the movie, when Chris falls off the bronc and he gets stamped by the hoof of the horse. The thing I left out was, remember the guy with who was the leg? Yeah, that was the one part left out. So we're trying to figure out how to shoot the fall, and it was late in the night. It was a night shoot. And there, you know, there's like about 200 extras all around, like a gladiatorial sort of arena. It was the rodeo, and it's all sand, dust, and we're sort of sitting around trying to figure out what's the best way to shoot it. And while that's happening, Clint sort of sachets over and picks up one of these black magic cameras, this camera that these guys wanted to experiment with the movie, because there's a lot of sort of tight spaces that we had to shoot in that it was a bit hard to maneuver with the camera. And next thing you know, sort of he's getting down on his like hands and knees like this, and he's like, "All right, Bradley, why don't you come behind me and jump up over and I'll get it." And then I'm 230 pounds with rodeo gear on and a dipping around, and I'm like, all right, I guess I'll just, so I'm like looking at Rob, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna jump over Clint. And I jumped over him, and dust flies everywhere up in his face, and he's like, all right, let's go again. And then I did it like 3 times, and then he sort of got up, and then he turns off and hands the camera. That's enough of that shit. And that was it, and that shot's in the movie. Yeah, because we put the horse in the background. Yeah.
It was literally enough. I mean, the stuff was flying up.
It was.
We didn't hear last night what you thought of his impression of Clint Eastwood.
I thought he was doing Ronald Reagan.
There's a pie, and